Hello and welcome to Man's Model Moments Midweek Model Meet. Good evening to you all. Just me this evening because I'm going to be talking about a little bit about how this will change. I'm a bit fuzzy around the edges, I noticed. Let me just check the fade there. There we go. There we go. I'm all there now. Well, at least I'm all on the screen. Whether I'm all there or not is another matter. But let's have a little look, see who's in tonight. We've got Graham Ball, we've got Adrian Hook, we've got Dave, World War II Scale Models. We have Julian Hall, we've got Idwell Williams, we've got David Markey, we have Drew, we've got Mark Grad. We have Danny Gable. We've got Simon's Modelling Shed, got Adam McDonald, got Keith, got Black Skunk Works. We have let's see down the list. John Farrant. We've got Steve's Gaming Part 2. We got Russell Bryan, 27 seconds. We have Hurricane Hobbies. That's a good title. I like that. I'm just going to move I'm a little bit skew if. Oh, no, destroying stuff. Oh, also, I haven't got my background lights on, so. Let's put these on before I get the mosquitoes buzzing around the edges there. And that brings us up to the present. Oh, I'm Brian Smee. Good evening. So good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining. Still not quite there. There we go. Cheers. I'm drinking Prior Life tonight, which is rather pleasant. It's a nice quaffable drink. It's a Green King. Never used to like Green King, but they've grown on me. It's only a 3.4. Obviously, it's a blue and green can, so you can't see it on screen. There is nothing wrong with some de Havilland mosquitoes, Mark, but the kind of weird little artifact mosquitoes, not so much. So we've also got Lox9 and NJ Bamforth have joined us. Welcome. Welcome, everybody. So, a few things I wanted to talk about tonight. First of all is how the structure of Man's Model Moments Midweek Model Meet is going to change. I think for the better, but you tell me. Same time, same day. Nothing on that is changing, but I want to bring a bit more structure into it. So I've kind of had days where I kind of don't know really what to do. And I've had other days where we've got good topics and then I've not had the guests to bring in. So I thought what I'm going to do is I'm going to change it to a monthly cycle. And what I'm going to be doing, if I can show you a very dull spreadsheet, just to give you the idea. Let's see this. And let's bring that across there so I can actually see what I'm doing. So let's just make that big. Okay, so basically I wanted to do a regular cycle. So obviously some months have 4 weeks in them, some have 5, depending on, the length and how it fits in and everything. So I thought I want to do a regular 4-week recurring schedule, and then every 5th week, whenever that happens, do an out of sequence thing. So this is my first kind of draft of this. So people liked the build along stream on Sunday. Now I can't necessarily commit to a regular slot, an extra regular slot on Sundays. I get very little free time anyway, and Sundays is fairly precious to me. So I thought, well, why don't I incorporate that into the Wednesday midweek model meet? So it was also suggested by one of my patrons, YouTube members actually. Patrons is a nice word to use, but obviously Patreon itself isn't that great an engagement site. Not for a smallish creator. I think maybe when you get bigger, I think it's easier. That we actually announce what that's going to be so that people can actually build it along with me, which I thought was a really good idea. And obviously doing it on a midweek model meet makes it a regular thing, makes it open to everybody, can do it in advance, announce what that is so that people can buy the kit if they want. And then even if like 2 or 3 weeks in, they could buy the kit, watch the previous one, sort of get up to that point and then build it along in the stream with me. So I thought it's a good one to do. And then I thought the second week in a month would be the topic with guests. And I think making one of these a month means that it's not too, it's not forced. You're not trying to find, a topic just for the sake of having a topic. Sometimes they come along and they're natural, like the death of Shunasutu Tamiya last week was, unfortunate. I mean, he had a good innings, but everybody has to go sometime. But, it was fortunate for a topic to talk about Tamiya for that, and, what legacy he had left. And I think that was a good discussion. So it does mean it's obviously not going to be quite as reactive, which I think is not necessarily a bad thing. But it just make it a bit more structured, and it also means it gives more time for people to be able to commit to come in with guests, so I can get more regular guests, not regular guests necessarily, but more guests in that regular slot so that we have a good discussion, which I think is important. And then the third week, I thought we'd do unboxings. So people seem to like the unboxings as well. And again, that allows a good 4 weeks at least for people to be able to vote on what unboxing it should be. So I can put up a list. I did it on week 3 because I often get my ICM stuff a couple of weeks into the month. So that gives it time for those, relatively new releases to be discussed or seen on the channel as well. Week 4, then I thought I'm going to, and the first of those is tonight. I'm sort of incorporating 4 and 5 into today. Week 4, I'm going to build a diorama. So it's going to be a bit like the build along, but obviously I'm building a diorama and can talk about the different techniques, because there are quite a lot of different techniques in building a diorama from building a standard model. And by diorama, I mean diorama stroke vignette. I don't, necessarily mean it's going to be a super complex one, although that may change, obviously as I do one, then the next one I'll try and do something a bit different to incorporate different techniques in there. And obviously the tips and tricks, I think I don't want to do that on a monthly basis because, again, I think that could be a bit forced otherwise. Because 2 hours, you can go over quite a lot, So I thought bringing the tips and tricks in the odd installments, if you like. So it's going to be like, what, four of those a year? Let's see, there's 12, 24, 48. Yes, there should be 4 odd months, 4 odd weeks to do tips and tricks, dedicated session. And that gives plenty of time for people to be able to talk about what sort of tips and tricks they would like to see. So that is the plan. Obviously, doesn't accommodate for missed weeks and stuff, but I would try and keep this schedule even if something happens. So if I'm off and there's an unboxing week that I'm off, I won't push that to the next week, so that'll disrupt the flow of things. I'll try and keep it as that. So the diorama would still be the next week, and then we just have more unboxings well, not more unboxings, but those unboxings wouldn't change for the next time, if you like. So that's kind of up for discussion tonight. So again, if you've got any comments or questions about what I've just said, please do feel free to put them in. As always, if you can put question in big capital letters or comment in big capital letters or QQQ, CCC in capitals, it just helps me draw my attention to those. I'm actually just going to scroll up just to make sure I didn't miss any comments or questions while I was talking there. So a few more people popping in. John Christmas, good to see you. Although I spent 6 hours in A&E having eye irrigators, got chemotherapy treatment in it. It was burning, very painful. Sorted now, but watching out of one eye. That sounds very nasty, John. Take care of yourself. Yeah, don't do that. So Julian says, also having a set week for guests gives you and then more notice for bail. Yeah, exactly. You could do a poll on here. Yes, I could. If I could work out how to do polls on StreamYard, I would do that. Adam McDonald says, is Quickshine good, and what is a good water-based varnish? So I've heard mixed reports about Quickshine. It isn't a direct replacement for Pledge, as it does some of the stuff Pledge does. It doesn't have the one chemical that I believe gave Pledge its unique properties. It's okay. I mean, you can use lots of water-based varnishes. I wouldn't say they're necessarily any really good water-based varnishes. I think you really need to go to like a lacquer or an enamel-based, a solvent-based varnish to get a really good one, in my opinion. But I mean, the ICM varnishes are pretty good. They don't. The matte one, I like the matte varnish that ICM does. It doesn't dry super flat matte. It's more of a slight sheen. I've not really used the semi-gloss. The gloss is okay, but they're never going to give you the sort of surface finishes that a solvent-based one is, fortunately. Adrian says, could you combine in tips and tricks doing catch-up with models that have been started, like the Short Skipper and the Firefly? Yes, that's a very good idea, Adrian. I think that is definitely one that it would also help push those projects along. So I think that is definitely a good one. We could do a build along for the Skipper. Have people sawing and sanding and using loads of filler. Is I have a query inappropriate or no? No, it's completely appropriate. Some people talking about varnish, ammo varnish, no problems. I believe VMS is very good. I don't know whether that is water or solvent based though. I've never managed to get my hands on some. Okay, so I think that brings us up to the present. So as I mentioned earlier, let's just get rid of that screen so I can do the bits. Oh, actually, I didn't want to do that. Or maybe I did. We'll see. Tonight, I entitled it Build a Diorama. So I wanted to really address, I'm talking vignette stroke diorama. What I'm going to be doing tonight is very much a vignette, I would say, rather than a diorama. I think a diorama usually incorporates multiple subjects. It's telling a story, but it's a little bit wider. And those subjects that aren't necessarily vehicles, there might be a vehicle and then, a number of figures and stuff. It might be several vehicles. It might be figures and vehicles. Like a vignette can still tell a story, but it's not telling the story in the same way, I think. It's more of a backdrop for the center of attention, which is usually a vehicle. Not exclusively. It could be, vehicle. By that I mean, vehicle, ship, aircraft, whatever. It could also be a figure, but that's, I think, less common. So I really wanted to kind of approach that, because I think a lot of people, from what they've said on, group chats and online and through streams and stuff, have said, I like dioramas, but I've never attempted one, or I've never felt that I could, put a model in anything other than just, on a base. And I think it's worth showing that it's not really difficult. You can approach it piecemeal. The good thing, I think, with a vignette or diorama is that it's not necessarily, if you're very skilled or very dedicated, you can do it and then it's finished. If you're going for the first time, you can do it and then you can always add to it later. Again, I don't think there are too many dead ends in modeling. So I kind of tried to want to take the sting out of the feeling of, or the fear of doing a diorama or vignette. So now this was quite inspired quite a lot by a customer who came into the shop. They were at the Come and Try Warhammer Day, and they brought in this kit. This is a Revell 1/24 scale Land Rover, unfortunately painted dark green, so it is occasionally invisible here. It's got its new stealth coating on. It's a BAC one, obviously. It hadn't quite been built up to this. I've built up, I put all the seats in the side, and the chassis was done. You can probably see the bits that I've done because they are in the native plastic rather than painted, because I haven't painted anything here yet. And they brought it in and basically said, is this any use to you? I've lost the wheels. That's the long and the short of it. And I'm just like, yeah, I would never throw a model away just for the lack of parts. It's like, you could write to Revell and they'll probably send you some tires for the wheels. But they were just like, no, it's like, fine. So I thought, actually, and I was joking actually in the shop, that I could do a Liverpudlian diorama and have it up on bricks. Apologies to anybody from Liverpool. I went out with a Liverpudlian. She would have said the same thing. To be fair, it could be Manchester as well. There's plenty of places where you would find a vehicle up on bricks in the UK if you left it there too long. Which kind of got me more thinking into, okay, well, how would I do that? And, I thought, actually, that could be quite a nice little thing to do. Because an abandoned Land Rover, these things weather really well. And that would be quite a nice little setting for that. So that kind of brings me on to, and then I got thinking about, well, why don't I show people doing this? And I thought, I don't really want to video that, because it's already, a lot of it is already built, and, I'm going to build the other bits. I don't really want to video all of that. So I thought, well, if I do it on a stream, that kind of has the same effect, but I can also explain a little bit more verbosely what I'm doing, because on a video you're always quite restricted in kind of how you're explaining things. If you've ever written a YouTube video script, you know what I'm talking about. So let me just get my Excel sheet again, because it really got me into thinking, well, how do I go about building a diorama? And so let me So I just sort of listed out the starting, and this is just, again, almost stream of consciousness kind of thinking. But I think the important thing with any diorama or vignette, so you have some sort of initial idea, right? So the idea here was inspired by this. Doesn't matter where the inspiration comes from. The inspiration could come from, you see a World War II photo, or you see, a vehicle, aircraft at a show, or in the woods, or whatever it is. It could just be something you dreamt about in your mind. Your idea for your vignette or diorama is as varied as human experience can be, right? The idea is your first initial thing. So that was my idea, is get sort of an abandoned vehicle, and not kind of out in the woods abandoned, but sort of in a more controlled environment, like a workshop or something like that. Maybe in an abandoned workshop, but the idea I had was, let's make this a vehicle that at some point was going to have some work done it or something, and then for whatever reason the project went on, and maybe they went bankrupt or whatever, and then it's just sat there, whilst time has gone on. So that is the idea, the concept, and you need some sort of idea, because you need some sort of guide, some guiding principle of what you're doing, rather than just like, I need to put this on a base. It's like, well, putting something on a base is slightly different. You can make a generic base quite easily, piece of ground, just a flat. One of the things I would actually say is, I'll come to it in a second, is the base itself. Sometimes, if you just want to put it on a base, it's very easy to do that. So come back to that. Again, I just want to go up and just make sure I've got comments and questions starred before I carry on, because I don't like going back if I can help it, because it's a little bit disruptive to the stream. Let's get that one. And this, again, is why it's best to put question or comment in capitals or QQQ, CCC, so I can quickly spot those. So that's the idea. So for this, that's done. So we've got abandoned Land Rover, workshop. That's kind of what I've got there. So I think the next step is, and I think this is important, and I think some people skip it, and I think it shows in the end result, right? And this is one of the things that I think a lot of modelers are guilty of, and I've been guilty of it in the past myself, and I think it's one of the things you kind of learn as you go on, is that observation is key, right? I think it's one of the first things you're taught as an artist, is to look at the world, to really see the world, because our brains aren't built to really do that, right? So I'm a biologist by training, by nature. So it's really a matter of forcing yourself to actually see what's there, rather than your brain interpreting what's there and feeding you the highlights, which is what our brains do. So we've evolved to a point where your brain doesn't give you all the information. It tells you what it thinks is important for right now. So you have to kind of almost disconnect that part of your brain, that filter. So if you're a photographer, you'll know that shooting in what they call raw image format, and that varies depending on the camera manufacturer, but if you're shooting a raw format, That's what you want. That's what you want to do your image processing, and that's the raw data. You don't want to shoot in JPEG. So JPEG is already processed. It's already lost some information. It's already interpreted the actual data from the sensors for you. Now, it's handy, and if you're just snapping photos for a holiday, JPEG's very convenient. It's very, it's nice and compact. They look good. That's kind of what you want. But it kind of makes some compromises. And if you've got a photo that isn't so good, there's not so much you can do with it because you've already lost a lot of the information that you need to process it. And we're kind of having to do the same thing here. And the example I always use is if you ask someone to paint a tree, they will usually, unless they've got some sort of artistic training, paint the trunk brown, and then they'll do some leaves and stuff, right? But if you actually go and look at most trees, they aren't brown, or at least they're not the brown that most people would paint, which would be quite a rich, I had a lot of red in the brown. Whereas actually, if you look at most trees, they're almost grey, or they are grey, with a brownish tinge. And more often than not, actually more green, where moss and lichen has grown on them. So, it's the idea of a tree that most people are drawing, and not an actual tree. And that's kind of where I'm coming with the research part. So, I've just noticed World War II Scale Models Dave has kindly donated 5 Man's Model Moments memberships. Thank you very much, Dave. You are a sterling fellow and a great supporter of the channel and other channels as well. If you do get gifted a free membership, you can head to the members section of YouTube on the community posts tab. You'll see a pinned post there, or if it's not pinned, it's a members only post. You'll be able to see. So if you filter for members posts, you'll see one which has the Discord invite for the Discord channel. Discord channel is the easiest way to interact with me. I've got Discord on all of my devices, and we have chats and you get sneak peeks and all that kind of good stuff there. So do come along and join us. So thank you, Dave, as always. Yeah, as Julian said, JPEG compression is a lossy format. RAW or BMP are lossless with no compression, but have huge files. Yes, that is the disadvantage of RAW files, is they are big. But I mean, it's not really an issue anymore with the size of SD cards that you can get, which are absolutely enormous. So if you think about the days when we had, 12 negatives to work with, only being able to shoot 100 photos, it's not really a, per memory card. Not really a problem. So, research. Let me show you a little bit of what I'm talking about. Remove that one. And we're going to give you this one instead. So this is the first thing that I went to, I mean, in this case, Google. Other search engines are available, and actually a lot of them are a lot better than Google now. But we'll stick with Google for the time being. And I just typed in abandoned Land Rover Mark III. Did I mean abandoned Land Rover Mark III? It's like, I don't think it makes that much difference. And you can see we've got a whole bunch. There's a lot of abandoned Land Rovers out there. So this gives me an idea, or at least this has helped me refine the idea that I originally had, right? So I'm looking through these. I like this one. which has the workshop in the background bit. I think that's quite good. It gives another piece of focus, a bit of a backdrop for it. So now we're talking about two things, really. We're talking about getting more ideas because we've had the idea, right? We haven't really thought about composition yet. I think somebody mentioned composition in the chat. We haven't got to that stage yet. We've still got our idea. Now, you may have a good idea of what your composition, your layout is going to look like. But I think doing initial research gives you a little bit more. Now, if you're working from a photo, like a World War II photo or something already, your research is going to be a bit different, right? Because you've already got the photos, so you kind of already know the layouts and stuff. But you might also still want to do some research on, what did, it might be black and white photo. What did that actually look like in color? Like the buildings, for instance. If you're doing a panther in a World War II French street, okay, are there any color images from that time of that street, or any, just after the war? Can I get an idea of what those cafes and things, how they were colored? Those sorts of things. What I'm doing here is kind of a bit of both. It's a bit of that composition bit, because I haven't set that up in my mind yet, and also how is this going to look? So, because I could go from something like this, which is basically just dusty, right? It's not too bad. This Land Rover, it looks like you could give it a good clean, some new fluids, and it would probably start. All the way through to that probably isn't. That's not really what I'm looking for. Yeah, that's kind of like crushed Land Rover, a little bit different. I really like this image. This, I think, because it's a 3/4 shot, I definitely want my Land Rover sort of pointing this way on my diorama, I think, with a sort of backdrop, to break up the silhouette. I also like the kind of foliage behind it, perhaps not so much on it, but also look at all this green lichen and moss that's growing on it. That's the kind of idea of how I want things. So I'm also getting ideas now of how I actually want the model to look, not just the overall composition. There's another one here. I quite like this, but I'd like it kind of flipped the other way, right? I want this 3/4 composition in my vignette. That's just what personally appeals to me, rather than it going this way. But again, this is a nice image for all the moss and the grime. This gives us an idea of what kind of weathering we're going to need to do in this vignette. Not quite as extreme as this. So that's not what I want to do. It's not something like this. It's not as extreme as this. I don't want to go like completely ruined. But I mean, to some people, Sully would probably look at that and thought, yeah, that's the one, right? But this is firming up my ideas. And do I want the boot open? Maybe, because this does have the full engine inside, and that gives some other opportunities for weathering. So all of this I'm kind of taking stock of. Now, typically what I would do is, I've already done this obviously, is for whatever images that I like, they don't have to be exactly what I'm looking for. They just have to be inspirational, if you like, or give me good ideas about the weathering, for instance. Like this one, I quite like. But I'll be saving these images. I'll be clipping these images and putting them in a folder. That could be online, or it can be, on your computer, whichever you prefer. So this doesn't have to take a massive amount of time. It can just be like a quick flick through. I didn't do a huge amount, to be honest. So let me now. Oh, that's not the one I wanted. I'm going to go back to my. It's not easy as StreamYard to do this anymore. Let's go back to this. So, got my research. I kind of I've got images of suitable vehicles. So now I'm going to plan. So what I'm going to do for this, see if I can get this working. This is going to be a test. Stop sharing that, thank you. So we're going to switch to this camera. Yeah, there we go. I'm going to move my keyboard out of the way. So all I'm doing here is, oh, I've got that in the way, is if it will focus for me. Hello. Thank you. So this, I'm just, oh, for God's sake, come on. Let's give it something to focus on. Thank you. So here I'm just going to kind of plan out. So I'm just going to quickly sketch, and this doesn't have to be a Rembrandt or anything. So I want my Land Rover to be sort of like so, sort of front and center in this. And then I want it standing in front of like a workshop kind of thing here to give that backdrop from here. Probably with a door, which might be there, or it might be back here. I'm not quite sure. So I'm going to put a question mark on that because I'm not quite sure. And then I'm going to want some, probably have the door here and not this one. And then I'm going to have like a nice bush there. So we've got some stuff, and then we can have some sort of tools or bench or something here with maybe a wheel off, something like that. And then, you know, the thing on bricks. So this is just to get a rough idea of what the, as Lox9 has just said, the composition is going to be. So how we're going to be. This is not set. This is just giving us an idea of how we want it to be. You know, you can kind of look at it from the front as well, how it's going to be. So we're going to have our Land Rover here. We want this thing in the back. We're going to have a door there with some bits here, and then bush kind of there to give us a rough idea of, okay, is this going to do what we want? Do we need to have more stuff here, for instance? And then, of course, we can get our actual vehicle. Ooh, snowy. That's that stealth coating again, look. It's a very dark olive green. It's been painted. It won't be. I'm going to do it, I think, in that light blue, because that light blue looks really good when it's weathered. It provides a really nice contrast, as you probably saw on some of that, with both the green, the moss that I'm going to have on it, and also the rust bits that I'll put on. So, you know, I can kind of put this on a piece of paper and then work out roughly how big that base needs to be, right? And having a laser cutter, I actually used this scrap piece that I failed to cut some stuff out of previously. And this fits quite nicely. Let me just move that a little bit so you can see it a bit more. So this is a little bit over, well, it's about A4 size actually. This fits quite nicely here, with room at the back here for that building. And what I just did, literally as the intro was coming on, was cut a couple more pieces here. So I actually went out because I was like, how big does a workshop need to be in this scale, 124 scale? So I went out and measured my garage, and it came out as 90 millimeters. So I quickly just threw this in. Oh my God, look at that. It worked. That's the first join I've done on the laser cutter, and it's actually worked. I'm impressed. I've just put this together. So I measured basically what kind of dimensions I wanted. And so that's going to be like so. And then I'm going to have this slightly angled. I don't want it parked parallel to that. So I can have that a little bit out there. I can have the door here with some bits here, and then nice bush tree kind of here to provide that visual backdrop as well. So that gives us the basis of our diorama there. So that's the kind of fleshing out where we are with the composition. So I think it's always good, whether you're using, obviously I've got access to the laser cutter. Lots of people don't have that, but you can use card or paper. You know, again, this is just about getting the visual composition. I mean, I'm probably going to use this as well because it's nice to use something like solid like that. And I can texture that and everything afterwards. But that gives the visual composition. I'm happy with that as a little vignette. All good. Right? So again, this doesn't have to be really complicated. You know, that is, this literally took me, it took me more time to design this cut here on this than anything on this piece. So all of this I've done in the last hour, right? I haven't thought about the composition that much, how it's going to be. This really came out, all of this, it was literally in the last hour, together with putting that baseboard, you know, cutting that baseboard and cutting those two pieces. So, right, let me quickly go and have a look at let me just change the camera. There we go. I should have taken the virtual screen off, shouldn't I, for the close-up. Oh, John Ike has joined us. Welcome. And Craig, good to see you. Let me just go through the starred comments. So yeah, as Lox9 said, composition is the technical term for that kind of plan, which is informed by the research you've done and the initial idea you had. Richard Smith says, very disappointed you haven't turned your spreadsheet into a pie chart. I suppose I could do I could log all the time that it takes and then do a pie chart of, you know, the time spent on the various different elements. I expect that would be fairly biased towards the base building and model elements, right? Because the idea was literally 2 minutes in a shop, you know, with a quick discussion. The research took about 10 minutes tops. The plan literally took, I don't know, 10 minutes at most, probably not even that. And then obviously the models and the base, that's going to be where all the time is. So it wouldn't be a very interesting pie chart, but I appreciate the comment. Julian Hall says, a crash stroke diorama can rescue a bad model. I had a nightmare with a 172nd Hurricane's undercarriage, so I did a diorama of a belly landed Hurricane with landing gears strewn behind it as wreckage. Yes and no. So for the example you've given there, Julian, absolutely. You know, if you just want to do something like that, then it's that works. A lot of people will say, though, of a bad model, I'll turn it into a crash. Well, it's like, actually, if you're going to show a crashed model, like a crashed aircraft, if it's a belly landed kind of thing, where there's relatively little damage to the actual aircraft, or vehicle, whatever it is, you can get away with that. But if it's anything more, you've got to do more work than if you were just building the base thing, right? Because any tear in the fabric or the structure of the vehicle is going to show what's beneath. And if it's a bad model, it's unlikely to have that anyway. So really, if you're going to do like a Russian T-72 exploded in Ukraine and then rusted up, right? You need really a full interior T-72 model to do that with. Or you're going to have to scratch build a lot of those internal elements. You're then going to have to wreck them and rust them up, yes, but it all needs to be there. Otherwise, it's just going to be an empty hole, which looks wrong. So it's one of those things that I always, hear people say and just like, yeah, but it's a very narrow sliver of, crash stroke dioramas that can rescue that, a bad model, as it were. And just I've already shown that. Now, that's a good question. How many elements do you put into a diorama? Now, for me, if you've got a diorama, there has to be if you're telling a story, which a diorama is really meant to do, we like focus. Humans like to focus on things. They like one thing that grabs attention. So really, there should be one central focus for your diorama, whatever that diorama is. So I had a friend, so I still have a friend, but he did it was a huge diorama, like over 6 feet long, of a 1/35th scale U-boat coming back to base after a successful sortie in Saint Nazaire. So obviously the U-boat was the focal point. Now, he also he built the entire dockside. So there were I don't know how many shops and various building fronts. There was the actual dock. There was all of these pieces as the backdrop for it. And then in terms of other subjects, there was a truck. There was a German camera crew, doing the cine cameras. There were people welcoming the crew back, so there was a lot going on, but there's a lot to look at, a lot of things that you can, because the thing is with a big diorama like that, you're looking at it and it's the little things that you're noticing off on the side that really make it absorbing, right? But the focal element of that was the U-boat. So what you don't want to do in any diorama is have two equally interesting things, because it confuses your mind as an observer. What am I looking at? What is this telling me? And if that's not apparent fairly quickly, people will lose interest and move on. Especially if you think if this is in a model show or something with lots of things to look at, something that draws the attention straight away and is immediately understandable, even if there's lots of more elements and depth to it, that's fine because that keeps the attention. But there has to be some sort of focal point. So I would say it doesn't really matter how many elements you have, provided it's obvious what the central focus is. So focus, I would say, is the most important thing rather than elements. This is something that comes out with something like Games Workshop's God, what do they call it? The Golden Demon. When they're doing the diorama pieces, or even on single pieces, it's just like good mini painters will always tell you they spend most of the time on the face and the areas around it, because faces are what draw your eye. Biologically, that's what we're programmed to do, right? Is pattern recognition. Pattern recognition and faces is really important to us because we're social. So they spend most of the time on that. You don't spend as much time on elements that you don't want people to be looking at. That's one of the trick of painters. They might still do them to excellent standards, but with more muted colors, with less detail, blah, 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 blah. Whereas, they'll often use light and, make a lighter area. So the face and stuff will be lighter than some of the areas around it to draw your attention, to draw your focus to that point. So as long as you've got focus in your diorama, You know, the actual elements are secondary to that, you know. So imagine you're doing a diorama of the Bismarck and the hood, which would be extremely difficult to do realistically because, of course, they were miles apart. It was 16.9 miles, the shot that penetrated the magazine was made at. So to have them in, you know, realistically on a diorama, they'd be absolutely tiny. You wouldn't be able to tell any story. But if you've got a similar kind of thing, right, a jewel like that, it'd be difficult in a ship diorama because obviously, how would you depict it? It's just two ships sitting side by side. Well, you do the moment of the detonation of the magazine. The focus is now on the hood because that's what's going on. Bismarck is there, but the hood is the focus. So you'll see even in, you know, there's a category, I think in Golden Demon, which is like a fight between two minis. There the focus is that conflict. So you've got two elements and that's an immediately understandable situation, right? So there, it doesn't matter that it's kind of split between the two because the conflict between them is the focus, if you like. But that's where you want to build all your elements too. So it's all about focus. You know, just need to ask yourself, where are people going to look? Where do I want people to look first? You know, so with the Land Rover, I want them to look at the Land Rover first. That's the first thing I want them to look at. Okay, I want their focus to be on the Land Rover, and knowing that it's going to be this end on to the viewer. So you're going to see it like this. I want this area to be interesting. So this is what I'm going to have up on bricks to immediately draw the eye in. You can see that wheel is up on bricks. It immediately tells some sort of story, and then the weathering and everything brings it all in. It's going to be more around this area. I'm not going to spend as much time weathering this bit, which is going to be between that workshop and away from the viewer. It's going to be difficult to see anyway. So yeah, I'm going to do it, but I'm not going to do it to the level perhaps of here. And that's all perfectly valid. But if I know that in advance, right, when I actually get to weather this, I'm not going to spend, you know, 10 hours doing this part of the model, right? I know where it is. I know I don't want people to be looking there particularly. So I'm not going to spend as much time doing those elements. So having your plan to start with, and as I said, none of this has to be exhaustive. You know, it can literally be on the back of a piece of paper. I've got an Excel sheet because I happen to like working in Excel, and it means I don't put that piece of paper down and then lose it, because that's something I could easily do. So let me just go back to that Excel sheet just for a second. What I really like is have all these elements and just be able to pick them up very easily, but I can't. So we've got the idea, we've done some research, we've made our plan. So our plan, if I get my keyboard back, is Land Rover 3/4 left-hand side to viewer against workshop with door at rear and 3-stroke bush at front. Let me wrap text on that. There we go. Then you can see it. So that's my plan. Just so that I got it in my mind, because with a diorama or vignette, maybe this is a project to get started and then other things happen, right? Maybe, I don't know, the bathroom pipe bursts and, you know, your ceiling comes down and you've got to deal with all of that, and it's months before you get back to it. And you just think, what was I doing with this? Especially if you're like 3/4 of the way through something, or, you know, and it's a more complex diorama, having a plan lets you at least go back to that. And there are lots of tools on the web as well for this sort of thing. You don't need any of those things. You can just use bits of paper, whatever works for you. But if you've got some sort of plan, it prevents you from like forgetting or remembering when you're bringing it to the competition area. It's like, oh shit, I meant to put a cat in the back, stuff like that. And each step of this should inform the next one. If it doesn't, then it's irrelevant, right? And the next step I've got here is models. Now that's easy because I've got the Revell Land Rover already. I'm just going to put, can't spell scratch, scratch built workshop. Okay. Because that's all I'm having. Now, if this was something I'd thought of before getting the model, obviously I'd then be looking at, what scale I've got in. I know what scale I'm doing it because I got the model given to me, so it was dictated by that. But obviously, if I didn't, I'm clicking on that screen, but it's here, isn't it? Let me actually put 1/24th. Not 34th, Alex. Good grief. Just invented a horrible scale. 1/24th scale Land Rover, 3/4 left-hand side view against workshop with door. Now, if I was doing, say, if I wanted to do, I don't know, Juno Beach, it wouldn't be in 1/24th scale. Maybe I'd do like a 1/72nd scale section of Juno Beach, and then again, that would inform all of these extra stages, and what models then I actually go to. I might want the airfix Sherman crab tank. I might want, whatever it is. And I have to go out and buy those because I don't have those in my stash. So again, I can then add those onto the list of things that I'm looking for at model shows, but it's that kind of plan, right? Let me just go back to the live chat because I have not been paying attention because I've been on the other bit. Okay, there we go. Managed to quick couple of those. Lots of questions and comments, which is all good. I'll answer this one really quickly because I've just seen Locks put it up. Any figures? Now, I'm not going to have any figures in this little vignette. I want it to be either the viewer is getting a special view into this abandoned Land Rover by this workshop, wherever it is, or perhaps they're the one that's found it. I don't want any other figures in it. I think the vehicle and the weathering and the setup is going to tell the story by itself. Now, if you've got a more complex diorama with, say, 1/35th scale diorama with a couple of vehicles in, you might want almost certainly, you might want some figures in there to support the story you're trying to tell. So it really depends on that initial idea. What are you trying to tell? What story is it? Is it just an interesting way to display your vehicle? Or is there a particular thing you want people to take away from it? Let me just type that one. I'll quickly go to the other starred messages. So I just did the how many elements. That Landy is far too straight. So that will be addressed when we come to the modeling part of it, right? So that's going to, in fact, why don't I deal with that one now? So I put base next. And by that, I really mean this. So maybe actually I should say whoops. Base size stroke format. So I literally just use this scrap piece of basswood that was supplied with the 3D printer, not 3D printer, the laser cutter that I didn't manage to fully cut through because I hadn't worked out the laser settings at the time. So none of these elements are going to come out, but I'm not going to be able to use it for anything else. So I thought, well, this would be decent. It also had another piece on it. I just cut it across here. I kind of worked out it needs to be about A4 size. That's where I need to make the cut. I just laser cut it across. Boom. That's my. That's all it took me to work it out. It doesn't have to be super scientific. Now, with that, I'm going to have to build that up because obviously I can't just use this. It's too thin and flimsy, and it doesn't look very impressive. It's got no edge on it or anything. So I need some sort of build up on that because you don't want, with any diorama or vignette, it to be really close to the table. You want to lift it up a little bit, just give it a little bit more visual impact. If you're working on something larger, then there are lots of different options. So obviously wood is a great medium because it's nice and stable, but it's heavy. Excuse me. Foam board is great, but it just needs some support. So you're likely going to use some sort of hybrid. Now, I've found one of the useful things I quite like. And one of the things I often buy is cheap are these. So old picture frames. I actually picked this one. I picked two up actually in the local auction. Like two of them cost me like £3. Now, obviously, you take the glass out. You don't use the glass, and if you like the picture, you can always reuse the picture. But that is quite a nice area, nice base. Yeah. You've got a bit of hardboard in there. You have a little bit of an edge. You're probably not going to leave it in gold, but if you want to, you could. That gives you something nice that you can put in a foam board base that will support that and give you something you can work with. So that obviously is quite a nice, easy way to get started with a diorama, is using that sort of, repurposed thing. Just a standard picture frame. It doesn't have to be secondhand. You could buy one new, but you can usually pick them up quite cheaply, particularly if it's not a very nice picture. But you're not interested in the picture, so it doesn't matter. So base size format for me, here it's very easy. It's just like I'm going to say A4-ish. That's wood. I'm going to call it landscape. By landscape format, I just mean that the long edge is to the viewer rather than it being, a long, narrow one, which is, let's face it, fairly uncommon. But if you're going to use some sort of forced perspective, that might be something. I thought for a second Alex was auditioning for Ground Force. Certainly not. Certainly not. So yeah, we'll get to there. Not a pivot table. No, I must say I love pivot tables, or at least I loved pivot tables. Pivot tables are fantastic for analyzing big data sets. And I used to deal with very big data sets, very complex data sets, going across multiple product lines with different products from different regions, with different, all kinds of stuff. For this, no, not needed. Question: what percentage of a diorama should be the model? 50-50 or more stroke less? That's a good question. And I think it goes back to our plan here, right? If you think about, I'll keep the question up actually. It depends again. Is this a vignette and diorama are kind of interchangeable. A vignette usually implies a smaller, less involved setting. So this, I think, this Land Rover on the base is a vignette. I would call it a vignette rather than a diorama. Now, in that, the model is, it's about 50% of that total area, right? Maybe a bit less. But it's the main focal point. It is, there is nothing else there to focus on. Well, there won't be. There'll be the workshop in the background, but there won't be other models there to distract you. If this was a street with like a line of 1/72 scale tanks on it, that's quite different, right? The thing to, I think, bear in mind with your plan, your composition, is not to make it look natural. Again, if you're working from a photograph, a World War II photograph, or a Cold War photograph, or whatever, you know, a reference image or photograph, it's easy to get that right. Okay, if you're working from the machinations of your mind, that's, I think, where the research becomes more important, because you need to get a real idea of the scale between things that looks normal, right? If you were modeling a traffic jam, for instance, I don't know why you would, but say a modern traffic jam, you're not going to do everything with the bumpers touching, right? You know, naturally in a traffic jam, the kind of distances, and the other thing is you're not going to do them all the same, because different people have different, you know, distances that they're comfortable with. Some might be right up against your bumper, but very few actually. When you actually look at cars in a queue, how far apart they are, you know, it can vary from 18 inches to sort of 3 feet. So you want some natural differences in there. So it's just trying to get that balance right, of what looks natural. So I wouldn't say there's a percentage of like 50-50 or more or less. It is, again, I would say go back to, or maybe we should put in you've got your idea, then is let's insert a line, and it's just like, what story are we telling? I think that's probably, I've alluded to it a lot. Oh, just realized I'm not sharing this. So you've got the idea. So what story were you telling? In this, it's a very simple story. Story of an abandoned Land Rover. It's not much of a story, but that's an important thing to keep in mind, right? Because if I got carried away, right, and I start adding all this different stuff in the background, that could actually detract from like the focus of this, which is just an abandoned Land Rover. It shouldn't have a bunch of chickens in it and some, I don't know, an osprey sweeping across the roof of the it. And I think it sounds ridiculous, right, to say it about an abandoned Land Rover, because that's an obvious thing. It's very simple. It's not telling an amazing story. It's just like, oh, look, an abandoned Land Rover. People immediately can understand that. There's nothing more needed. Land Rovers are pretty ubiquitous, not just in this country, but they're kind of known globally because they've been used pretty much everywhere. And they do get just abandoned in places, and they're known like Toyota Land Cruisers. This could equally be a Toyota Land Cruiser, right? Robust vehicles that kind of get used in all kinds of areas, get battered and worn and often forgotten. If you're doing a more complex thing, then putting the idea that you have, how do you make the audience understand that, I think is much more important. So when you start to go to multiple vehicles and figures and things, what are they telling the viewer? What do you want somebody who doesn't know about this at all, he's not inside your head, so you got to try and project that. So for instance, I'm doing and I've mentioned it before, I'm doing a Ukrainian diorama, right? Now, if we've got a modern warfare setting, modern vehicles are pretty big, and you're not going to cluster them all together in most settings, right? So if I had a Challenger 2 and a Leopard 2 and a truck and a MRAP and 12 infantry all together on something the size of an A3 board, it's going to look weird. It's going to look cramped, it's going to look unrealistic, and it's going to be confusing. Nobody's going to know what story I'm going to be telling. It's going to be very difficult to pick that out. So I think whenever you're adding or taking away elements from a diorama or vignette, you need to bear in mind all the time, does it support that story you're telling? Is that the impression somebody's going to get from it? Yeah. So I think the model side of it is dictated by that story that you're trying to tell. So unlike a lot of our hobby, with a diorama, especially with a diorama, more so than a vignette, the story is the important thing. The message, what are you trying to convey, is more important than the models. The models are the vehicle, not literal vehicle, but the vehicle you're using to impart that, right? Just to start a couple more of these little pieces, comments that people are making. Always good to get lots of comments and questions, guys. Thank you. That's a nice little, I once read a vignette diorama difference being that one is a photo and the other a video. I think that's a useful thing to keep in mind. I mean, obviously they are both really photos, but I think that conveys the idea of, again, talking about telling stories and getting ideas across. That's a good way to get the idea across, isn't it? Okay, so we've basically decided what base size and format we've got. Just going back to that plan, it was something that I think I've got it starred here. Here we go. Lox9 said, which is worth mentioning. So I've got this board, right? I've got the Land Rover, great, and I wanted that workshop in the back, right? Now it's no good if that workshop is going to be this big, right? Because you can't see it. It doesn't form. And I mentioned in the research part when I was looking at those photos about how I like the way that things were framed in the rear, and that's a perfect way to think of it. Right, I'm going to try and do this to you guys. Is that right? Yeah, I think so. I'm doing everything backwards here. So here, I'm going to have this actually coming across like so. Still quite impressed I managed to make that work first time. So as a viewer, bear in mind it's going to have a roof on it as well. Part of a roof, obviously, just the segment that's on the, it's a tiny triangle sliver of a roof it will be. But that is higher than the vehicle. Yep, so that is forming a backdrop. It's behind the vehicle, is what I'm trying to say. And then, if you recall, I was going to have like a big bush either at the back or the front. Again, it's about forming that three-dimensional piece. There's no point me having the workshop at the top, at the front, right? You don't want it like this. It's just like that'd be a pretty stupid diorama, right? Unless you were doing some sort of clever ambush diorama, you know. Again, what story are you trying to tell? What story you're trying to tell dictates what sort of composition plan you've got, and then that dictates what models you need and how the base is going to come out. So, but Loxline is absolutely right. Whoops. In saying that if you form that, you know, small, medium, high through your diorama, again, it will feel more natural. It draws the focus to the midground, which is where you want it. You want the midground and your subject. You want whatever people want to look at. You want people to look at to be in the center, because again, eyes naturally draw towards the center. It's okay for the bits to be drawn out. So let me just answer this question from Craig. Any mechanics legs sticking out underneath the Land Rover? No. So for this is abandoned. So my story is that this hasn't been discovered. So either the viewer is discovering it, or this is just out there. You know, they're seeing the secret window into what nobody else has seen, you know, because this is just quietly rotting somewhere. That's the story I'm telling. I'm not having it like there's somebody found it working on it. That's a valid story. It's just not the one that I'm going to be telling. So hopefully that makes sense. So even for a very simple vignette like this, there's a lot of different ways you could go with it, right? I could make it and not have it rotting at all. I could do it pristine with like people with a house behind it, with people putting luggage in to go on holiday. You know, there's so many ways. And I think that's one of the reasons that a vignette it's like a little slice of your mind, you know, which I think is why they are quite popular. But in my case, no mechanic legs. No. Maybe a skeleton. Guy died doing it. So that's a different story you could tell, right? Oh dear. Okay. So that's that one. Adrian says, Timo do some diorama baseboards, which is quite dense foam, which makes a good base, and they're dirt cheap. They're A4 sizes. Yeah. So that is foam board, basically. When I did my Temu videos, I showed that you could buy that stuff. It's quite cheap. The A4, they come in like packs of 4 or 5 or something. Those are ideal because unlike just foam, because I mean, talking about base building in a second, but unlike just foam, it's contained, so it makes it easier to glue, makes it easier to cut. It stays in. It's good for like building like this stuff. If you don't have access to a laser cutter, foam board is fantastic for doing this sort of stuff. You can cut it with a knife. It doesn't get polystyrene bits everywhere if you're hacking away at polystyrene, which is another barrier for people doing it sometimes. So yeah, you can also buy that from art shops. Probably some places like the Range and stuff might do it, but it's pretty widely available. It depends. If you want to order it from Temu, from AliExpress or stuff, it's probably quite cheap if you're prepared to wait 2 to 3 weeks for it. It's if you want it right now, pop down to local Hobbycraft or whatever. Ordered some Mr. Color Varnish. Excellent. Adrian says, so with a vignette, less is more. I mean, generally, and again, this is general. It's a blurry, fuzzy line. We like to put things in boxes, but there aren't necessarily any boxes to put these in. A vignette generally it's a single subject in context, if you like, which is what I'm doing here. It's a single subject which I'm putting in context of it being abandoned. You could do a single subject in context of a lot of things, and where a scenic base becomes a vignette, again, is a blurred line. Really depends on it. If I was just going to do a piece of street with a piece of pavement next to it and put that by it, that's really a scenic base. It's not telling a story. It's just there's a Land Rover parked. That doesn't tell a story. It could be anything. That's a scenic base, I would say. It just is a bit more interesting than putting it on a piece of wood, I suppose. Maybe a small dog living on the bench seat. I'm not putting any figures in it, Craig. It doesn't matter how many times you ask. It's just going to be abandoned. I might make a concession and have some bird looking at it on the workshop. Some mice making. You guys are obsessed. You want me to make? You want me to put figures in this? Stop. Maybe have the Land Rover close to the front and not too close to the bench for visual balance. This is where some of like personal taste and context come in. I kind of want it to be kind of a little bit more up against the back, quite close to the workshop, and have a little bit of ground in front, just so that I can do something there as well. But if you were doing it, you would put your ideas and spin and everything on it, which I think is one of the cool things about models in general, and vignettes and dioramas more particularly here. Okay, a couple of people leaving. Goodbye, Julian. Goodbye, John Alec. Good to have you here. Definitely not Pablo, Craig. Definitely not. David Markey says, you have now helped me cement the idea I had for diorama that I can use for several scenarios. Oh, good. I'm glad it's pushed some brain cells around in some way. So the next part of this, because really everything we've been talking about now is planning, more or less. So the next part is base building. So this is where we really talk about some of what we've just been saying about materials. Let me try and switch over to the different camera and get us on this one. And let's remove virtual background. So in terms of, we can get rid of our plan, such as it was, scribbled on the back of a napkin sort of plan. So obviously I've already made this main base. This I would say is the base board, right? What I'm probably going to do on top of this is have like oh God, I've forgotten the word. What did we just talk about? Foam board. a foam board. A foam board is just foam. It's a foam core around two pieces of card, basically. So a foam board piece on top of that. And then obviously we're going to have this along here, which I'll just use white glue, wood glue, to glue down. And I'll probably do that as part of the base, so it's all together, before putting any groundwork on. That's probably how I will go. So this I will probably build as part of the base. So this won't have anything on. It'll be bare. And obviously I will put once I've finished it, I'll blank that off, so you can't see it. But that's probably what I will do. So that basically formed the essence of my base, because here it's going to be very simple. And obviously the materials you're using are going to depend on how big your diorama is, what you're going to have on it. Obviously, if you're going to have like a contoured area, this is going to be pretty much flat. Because you wouldn't build a workshop on the side of a hill, for instance, unless you were insane. But if you are going to have like a contour and then say water, obviously you're going to have some area that you're going to do, your resin pour on. So you need a base, then you need to build up your contour, whatever that's, again, XPS foam is great for that sort of stuff, but then you need to seal it. So you've got to think about the materials that you're working with for all of this, because a lot of the solvents and stuff that we use will eat into a lot of the foam that's used in that. So if you are using that, you generally have to seal it with PVA. PVA is your great diorama friend. It works in lots of different situations with lots of different materials, which I think people have actually mentioned here. Oh, that's a good one. Mark Grad said, is there a way to reflect day versus night settings? Yes, you do that with painting, which is relatively... so basically, if you're going to paint something in a night setting, obviously you're going to mute all your colors a lot. And you can use object source lighting, so if somebody's got a torch or a campfire or something, you can make that reflect light. Obviously these are fairly advanced things that you're bringing in there, but they can be very effective. So yeah, polyfiller mixed with PVA works well with diorama building. So there's lots of materials that you can use when doing your groundwork, and again, it will depend on, let's say, what sort of scenario, what sort of material you're using. As I mentioned, with the resin pour for water, that's again fairly advanced. That's something we'll go on down the line. With something fairly basic like this, you just need some sort of ground cover, right? So you can buy from various different people. Tamiya do groundwork paint. AK do a whole load. MIG do some. I think Berlinden might as well. But you can buy texture paints which go over that. You can also just use, as people have said, a polyfiller type thing. The disadvantage of using something like polyfiller is obviously it can crack, and adding PVA to it makes it more flexible, but it also accelerates the cure time. So you have to work faster with it, which isn't great. It doesn't have any texture to it. It's very smooth, because obviously you don't want to fill your walls with something which is pebbly. So then you need to add other material to it if you want any texture, or you've got to go over the top. And if you knock it and crack bits off, obviously it's going to be pure white. So you've got to think, okay, you're going to add pigment, and you're going to add PVA, and you're going to add some texture to it. So it starts getting more complicated. And each of those things will affect, things like the drying time, the resistance to, knocking and all those kinds of things. So just test what you're doing to make sure it's what you want before doing it on this. There are lots of ways you can get texture in, and look at Night Chef's videos and what he uses, like soil from his garden. You can use things like coffee grinds are also good. Let's say any of the texture paints and stuff, anything that gives you a in-scale representation of that, because a lot of like wargaming materials, for instance, are overscale, deliberately so. So just be aware of that. I wouldn't use sandpaper as a base unless you're wanting to do something very flat. Yeah, with something like non-slip texture, it can definitely work. Someone suggesting there, bashed kitty litter with a hammer. Yep. There are various different types of kitty litter, though. Don't use paper-based or wood-based and hit them with a hammer and expect them to get the same results as with like a vermiculite or something. So, but I mean, the groundwork, there is almost no limit on what you can use. It really is about what kind of texture do you want. The main thing is it has to be hard, yeah, because you want it to keep its form, not crack, and be resilient. So you don't want it in a couple of days to go moldy, for instance. So that's one thing to bear in mind. You know, you need whatever you're mixing to have some sort of long-term stability, and you don't want your diorama to turn into a fungus garden as it's sitting under, you know, some nice warm lights in some model show somewhere. That would be less than optimal. Right, let me switch over to the general cam, and let's just make sure we got our all set up properly. Let me remove that one. So base building. It's quite difficult because it's now at the level where it's behind my microphone, so I can't actually see where my mouse. I have to look at this screen here, in order to get on this screen here. It's quite weird. So base building. So wood stroke foam board stroke XPS type foam. So that's obviously quite a bit of a mouthful. Let's write that text. Sorry, I'm a stickler for formatting. So we for this particular one, we've got obviously a wood base, and then probably put foam board or some sort of XPS type foam on. Now, obviously, if we're getting some sort of contour stuff, we've got to carve that to shape. Carving foam, the best way to do it is with a hot wire cutter. That's if you can afford a hot wire cutter. You can get handheld ones now that are pretty cheap, like 15, 20 pounds. You can get larger bench ones, which are like 70, 80 pounds. It's the best. If you're going to do a lot of dioramas, it's probably worth the investment, because cutting, especially things like polystyrene foam, or even the XPS type of foam, unless you've got a very sharp blade, and when you've got sharp blades with, especially doing oblique cuts where you're cutting like the length of the blade, results usually in larger force, which very sharp blades with more force is not a great formula for safety. As I've mentioned many times in the past, all of my modeling related accidents have been self-inflicted where I have used an inappropriate level of force with a blade or other implement. Yeah. So yeah. Hot wire cutter eliminates all of that. It cuts nice and cleanly. You can get lots of different angles. You can, take multiple passes. You can actually create some texture with them as well. So, yeah, if you can get a hot wire cutter for using XPS foam, great. If not, foam board is actually a lot less messy because the foam is contained within those 2 layers of cardboard. And obviously, if you're doing things like buildings, it's great because they actually have nice smooth faces, and which you can then work with whatever on top. And then obviously we want to cover that with a hard, durable, and appropriately textured material. So there are lots of different things available. What I will do with this one, obviously I'm not going to do it tonight, but I will actually go through creating the groundwork on this board next time. And obviously the model will be a separate part, but really comes kind of between these steps. So the groundwork really has different stages. Actually, I guess strictly speaking, we should have this in the groundwork section. And not in that. Let's just get rid of that. But obviously, I'm not set up to do that right here and now. But I will show you mixing some of that materials. I'll also show you using some ready-made materials as well. So some of the AK products, which I have, which they kindly sent me. And different approaches, the kind of different results that you get from that. We can kind of do a side-by-side comparison actually on the piece. So Matt B. INVOICE 3D prints, that's a mouthful, says, I used to watch a lad called Luke from Greek Gaming Scenics when I was learning Diorama bases. He was great. Great base mixture, which was like sculptor mold, which is also great. Yeah. So I probably wouldn't recommend any particular thing for any of this, because a lot of it, I mean, Lox9 there has just said, Das clay is good for groundwork, whereas I would never use it for groundwork because it's too heavy, I find, over large areas. But I know people that love it. So it's a bit like modeling. There's a lot of different ways to approach it. It also depends on what time you have. If you know a rail model or a rail modeler or a rail model club, they have all kinds of recommendations for sculpting groundwork, because obviously they build massive layouts. 6, 12, 15 feet is not uncommon for a rail layout, and they've got to make that often modular, and it's got to be sturdy but light enough to be able to transport and be supported and all that kind of thing. So you can get a lot of good tips from rail modelers. Now, you might not employ a lot of their latest stuff with groundwork and stuff because they're doing a very different type of modeling, different scale generally. But for the groundwork stuff, there are some great recommendations, and for some of the other stuff as well. It just depends. So rail model channels as well are a great source of inspiration for this. I would tend to, and again, it's difficult to recommend a product when it might not be available everywhere as well. So one of the things that like a lot of American modelers always used to say was use Sculpey, and it's just like you couldn't get, it's just not available in the UK, or it never used to be. So it's just like, what the hell is Sculpey? you know, if you can go to things that you can make yourself, things like a papier mâché, you can get, probably not newspapers these days, but paper and glue, both available pretty much anywhere. You can use a lot of different types of glue. You can use PVA, PVA or normal paper, your junk mail, rip it up, put it in glue, put that on. That's going to form a really solid base, and it's when it dries, it's pretty light because it's just paper and glue. I mean, IKEA have been making furniture out of that for decades, so it's good enough for them. And the availability of things like MDF and these kind of materials make it easy to make quite three-dimensional structures fairly lightly, without having to resort to going to hardwoods and stuff. There is also the basically like clay soaked or rather plaster soaked bandages, effectively. So I actually sell them at the shop. They're really easy to use because you basically cut a strip, you wet it, and you mold it in place. You generally need something underneath it, and generally that is forming like a big contoured piece. So that is kind of your groundwork, or sort of somewhere between base building and groundwork. So it's forming a 3D structure, and then you want to put something on top of that basically both has a color to it, because disadvantages of any of those bandage type pre-prepared things is they're white. So unless you're doing a snow scene, if you get any chipping or anything on your base work, so you'll see Night Shift does this as well. He will color the groundwork that he's putting on. I mean, obviously, if it's a commercial product, it's already colored, but so that the texture of, and you might paint over it, obviously, but the texture you're getting, if it does get chipped or anything, it doesn't show like bright white. There's nothing worse than getting a diorama which gets chipped and it looks like plaster underneath, because it just shows it for what it is. It's a diorama and not a real thing. We all know that, but it's the suspension of disbelief is kind of ruined by that. Yep. So plaster of Paris, I think has been, it's much like polyfiller. Again, it works. It does stay workable for a time. It depends, and again, it's white. The good advantage of things like polyfiller and plaster of Paris is you can add pigment to them. I would say pigment rather than paint. And the reason I would say that is because paint is diluted. So if you add brown paint to plaster of Paris, it will come out a very light, like tannish brown. If you're adding kind of a really burnt umber powder to it, it'll still lighten it a lot, because effectively, if you think you're mixing dark brown and white, but it comes out a lot darker. So and pigments are obviously pure pigment, not just the diluted form with paint, because paint, you've got everything else that keeps them in solution. Half is liquid or more. So yeah, that's why we have the convenience now of being able to buy ready-made products so that we don't have to do this. But they're not the only thing. And on a budget, it's more than possible to create this sort of groundwork without having to go to purchase products. So Humbrol do a smart mud that's apparently the same as the VMS that Night Shift uses. Really? I've got some of Humboldt's products, and I found them to be okay, but nothing special. I've not tried their Smart Mud. As I say, I do have some AK stuff, which we'll be using next time, and some Tamiya stuff as well, just so you can get a difference. Also, some Games Workshop stuff. So I'll show you a whole bunch of different ones together, so you can see different effects. Because of course, there is nothing here that says that you have to use one product, right? You can use anything you want, and it can be from any manufacturer you want, or homemade, or whatever. So again, one of the beauties of this hobby is that a lot of people are like, oh, I use Vallejo paints. It's like, right, okay, I've used Vallejo as well. I also use the Army Painter and Games Workshop and Golden and P3 and ICM and AK and MIG. And why would I restrict myself to a single brand? It's one of the difficult things about having a shop is that because there's so many different brands, it's impossible to stock everything. And sometimes you just have to say, no, I don't carry that. Do you stock Vallejo paints? No, because there's so many of them. It would cost a fortune to stock them all. Where would I put them? So you have to restrict yourself as a supplier, not necessarily as a user, though. So as a user, you can use whatever you find is, good. So if the Humbrol Smart Mud stuff turns out to be fantastic, then go for it, use it. I wouldn't ever say, don't use it because it's Humbrol or whatever. But anyway, we've going for almost 2 hours now, so I just want to turn it over a little bit more to you guys. This has been a bit of an exploratory session, I guess, tonight. But that is the kind of format that I want to go forward with in the future that I mentioned at the beginning, is having a structured, 4-week cycle of what we're doing on the midweek model meet. This obviously was a bit of a combination of the diorama and tips and tricks, because it wasn't really, because we're not actually making the diorama, which we will be next time. But let me know what you think of having the regular cycle of, as I mentioned before, and I can just put it back on here. So having the build along. Also, please let me know what sort of kit you think would be good for the build along, whether it be an AFB, an aircraft, a ship, or whatever. Please, not a ship. And then I'll put a note out in advance of the build saying this is the kit we'll be building, and then I'll build that, and obviously other people can join in if they so wish. Then having a week where we have a particular topic for discussion with guests, a week which will just be unboxings of kits that you will vote on what you want to see, and then a week of doing diorama. So for coming weeks, it will be the Land Rover, probably, and then I'll do a different diorama, like with different techniques. So, like with more advanced pieces, like different groundwork and all that kind of stuff, as we go along. And then intermittently, we'll have a tips and tricks session. And again, I'll ask you guys what you want to see in the tips and tricks, and then I'll narrow it down and publish the sort of topic, what it will be on the week. Oh, Casey, good to see you just as we're finishing. Loxine also said you can get basically cobblestones. So yes, there are lots of different materials available. I'll talk about that actually a lot more next week in the actual groundwork, because there are lots of different ways to do that, some of which we kind of touched on, and others of which we haven't. So we'll pick up on that and kind of explored a lot more in the next diorama session, where you'll actually see me do stuff as well. So I'll do the practical demonstration. This week has all been about the kind of talky side of it, and the planning, which I think is really one of the most important pieces of a diorama, because you can have excellent execution. You could be night shift level good at doing a model and all the elements, but if you've got the plan wrong, if the focus isn't there, it's not going to work. I think to get to that level, you kind of already have all of that in, and you have that in your mind. But if you're just starting out, it's important to understand that that is the fundamental piece. And if you get that wrong, the execution of it kind of doesn't matter, right? You've got to have all of the things lining up in a row, to get that real, let's call it the night shift effect. But anyway, thank you all so much for joining. Let me know what you think of the scheduled or the planned schedule for Midweek Model Meet in the future. Any ideas, anything we didn't mention, any questions you have on making dioramas, making vignettes, any thoughts you have, please do pop them down in the comments. And as always, have a fantastic rest of your week, good modeling moments of your own, and I'll see you on the next one. Hopefully, if I can get the photos done, the Dornier video will be out tomorrow night. I'll put that out at some point tomorrow, and hopefully I'll see you then. So thanks, everybody. Have a good one.